Prologue. Callus didn't warn Soberk about the dangerous Asgardian artifact. Instead, the 60-years-old man placed the attaché case on the table and he opened it, revealing the small alien artifact. "Talasama," said Callus. At the utterance of the command word, the weapon hissed like a copperhead snake and it produced a green gleam. Then it opened. Callus watched as a tongue of fire rose sharply from within the artifact. The fire sensed Soberk's magic, thus it attacked him. Yet the man held his ground, and he opened his arms invitingly. The fire engulfed Soberk's young, slender, and athletic body. "Ah!" shouted Soberk. Callus felt the heat from the blaze while he stood across the room. It was not the first time that had seen a human burnt alive. He had burned a few men, women, and children in his career. He was familiar with the painful screams, the melted flesh and the smell. But other than for the wretched screams, Soberk's burning was very different. Soberk was in immeasurable pain. A mask of flames covered his face, he was blinded. He breathed erratically. Soon he was unable to stand, consequently, he dropped on his knees. He clawed at the air like a wild animal. But through it all, Soberk concentrated on his father because of the misery that the man had caused in his life. After a while, Soberk was quiet as he channeled everything to the thought of ridding the world of his father. Callus was observing the burning man. The fire hadn't burned Soberk's body in the normal way. Rather, the thick flames rested on the skin. The flesh became brown and hard. Callus sensed the evil within Soberk. It was a sixth sense born from years of working with unsavory people. Therefore Callus knew he had chosen wisely, since he realized that Soberk hadn't cured the sick in refugee camps with his minimal magic out of kindness, it was for the glory. He enjoyed the world's attention. Eventually the fire subsided on Soberk, until it vanished. He stared up at Callus. "You have 24 hours to master the magic. Afterwards we oust your father," said the spy master while he noticed that Soberk's eyes were dark grey. 5 minutes ago they were brown. Callus was glad that he got the assignment, because it had been a while since he last orchestrated a puppet government. The Asgardian artifact closed itself, then Callus shut the attaché case. He walked out the room with the case, and he slammed the door behind him. Raven was outside. The telepath was thin and 5 foot 6 inches tall. The young woman was concerned about the choice of Soberk. Callus saw it in her green eyes. "Walk with me," he said. Raven turned and went side by side with her godfather. "He is hiding many things from you," said Raven. "Whenever I scan his mind I find new secrets, hidden in what I can only describe as black boxes. It's like the last assignment. And like the last assignment, you're going to open those boxes for me," said Callus. It took a long time to pick Fury's brain. Can you really afford to use Soberk without knowing what he is fully thinking? Yes. What of our sleeper agent in Atlantis? Has he stated that the target is destroyed? I'm still trying to reach him, it's like he's dead. What's going on down there? Callus wondered. Could Namor have stopped him? By the way, have you been paying attention to the virus outbreak? Asked Raven. Very much so, he replied with a cunning smile as he swung open the door to the helipad. Besides the overthrow of the Iran's dictator, Callus had T'Challa and Ororo on his mind. He received word from Exxon that they had visited her for information on him. They have reached that far, thought Callus. The capital of Iranzi. The great house. Alex Soberk stormed into his father's house. Fire poured out of his hands and it incinerated everyone in his path. He repelled bullets with hand gestures. His target was his father, the dictator. The old man was on the 4th floor of the great house. Soberk sensed his location, he closed in for the kill like a predator. On his way, he murdered his elder and younger brothers who defended their father. The siblings cried out, as they were burned alive. But before Soberk had killed his young brother, he had taken the man's mobile phone and used it. Then he crushed the device in his hand. Soon afterwards, he came upon his father. The bald man cowered at his son's feet. In an instant, he was black ash blowing across the room and through the balcony doorway. The flames died down in Soberk's hands. "It's finished," he said. Callus and a masked woman glimmer teleport near to Soberk. "Well done, son," commented Callus. "I'm not your son," shot back Soberk. Callus ignored it. He handed Soberk a document and a list. "The first one is the speech that you will give the nation and the world media. The list provides the actions you will take in the next few days. Curing the virus and healing the infected are the major priorities." Soberk smiled. "You have this all worked out?" Callus didn't answer. He had Soberk right where he wanted him. The power boost he had given the man was temporary and addictive like heroin. Soberk would require more of the boost from time to time. Callus knew about the Asgard artifact because it was his father and an army team that retrieved it from the Asgard dimension. Therefore Callus knew it was placed in Fury's hands. The spymaster glanced at Glimmer and the woman understood. Thus Callus and her disappeared. Soberk stared at the capital city from the balcony. Aranza was now his country and his intended rule would be without outside help. He grinned. "Whatever your real name is, sir. You are a fool. You can pull my strings for now, but it won't be so forever," he said. Chapter T'Challa stroked Ororo's exposed back as he sat on the edge of the bed. She smiled at him. Then the Kimoyo rang and he answered it. There was a text message that read, "My name is Alex Soberk. I require your urgent help." Hours later, Miney, outskirts of Aranza's capital, the mannerly maid brought in the magazines and she rested them on the small table in the waiting room. She placed her hands on the sides of her maple uniform. Then she turned to the guests seated on the sofa. She looked at the mid-30s man in front of her. He was handsome, large and strong. His fitness showed a man accustomed with arduous labor. But there was an aspect of him that unnerved her. His casual appearance was fictitious. He was primed, ready to either attack with ferocity or act coolly at any sign of trouble. His sword leaned against the sofa. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked T'Challa. "No thank you," he responded kindly. "And you MRS?" she inquired from Ororo. "I'm fine, but thanks for asking." The old lady made no other facial expression other than politeness. Then she exited the room in practiced short neat steps. T'Challa grinned because of the cover artwork on the first magazine, which was a Newsweek. The illustration portrayed the major pharmaceutical companies as giants cowering in the presence of Soberk, who was standing heroically with his arms folded. "I hope he continues with his rise in prominence. Maybe they'll nickname him Panacea," thought T'Challa, and he continued with the reflection. Still no one knows who or what caused the virus. Even Wakanda's virologists are unable to decipher the biochemical makeup. So Soberk's intervention was timely when everyone else was failing. The majority of the world's population may have been buried today if it was not for him. The World Health Organization may need to change their procedures when dealing with an epidemic like this. They were greatly inadequate. I'll have to send my recommendations. Then his thoughts went to Ororo and their relationship. He remembered the night before that they had danced Western style in the sky under the bright eye of the moon. She had enjoyed that, he thought. Her passion for life is one of the things I love about her, he said inwardly. On the other hand, the incident with the maid highlighted a quality Ororo liked about T'Challa. that he could fend for himself despite his royal upbringing. The time he had spent outside of Wakanda as a teenager had taught him rugged life. She reflected on it. So I can carry him to a dingy bar in outback Australia and he would not be put off by it, she said to herself. She was an attractive 30-year-old woman, almost 6 feet tall, toned, slender and shapely. An accomplished street fighter, she could defeat 8 thugs with her bare hands. Ororo also noticed the magazine cover. Her blue eyes traced over the image of Soberk. He was 6 foot, mid-30s and fairly muscled. His skin was not human, rather it was hard and brown. The eyes were dark gray. The scalp was bald. Ororo folded her arms and slanted her head as she watched the picture. Then she remembered the video phone conversation Soberk had with T'Challa and her. There was something about him that was oddly familiar. She had wondered about it on the flight to Aranzi. As she sat there, the answer finally resonated with her. He reminds me of Midas, she said. How so? T'Challa raised his eyebrow. They have the same superficial demeanor. T'Challa checked the time on his kimoyo. He's also late to the meeting that he scheduled. We can cut him some slack. He's healing the world. All rather conveniently though. Are we going to bring it up in the meeting? We should, just to get his reaction. He might think that we're jealous, accusing him of showing up right as the virus seemed unstoppable and then taking the glory. That is not jealousy, it's suspicion, and we have every right to be. It comes with the job. It comes with the job. Ororo smiled and she looked at the magazine cover again. This is serious. He could cripple that entire industry if he continues like this. At what cost to him personally, beside the physical changes, said T'Challa as he recalled that a month prior Soberk was an ordinary human-looking man with low-level magical abilities. We can only guess. If we learn his secret, then you could get a boost in your magic also, he said playfully. Then there wouldn't be a challenge in nurturing and mastering it, would there? She said. I rather visit my aunt and learn it from her. But Soberk's magic angle does throw a spotlight on Doctor Strange and Brother Voodoo. I can imagine how they are hounded as to why they couldn't do the same thing with their knowledge of magic. They were the experts before all of this happened. Essentially, magic is energy manipulation. Maybe Soberk has tapped into a new source. Ororo checked the time on her kimoyo. It was nearing 2 hours. Do you think Umba will ever open up about his mother? She asked. It's been 3 weeks now. I'll say yes once he gets over the shock and anger. I haven't made up my mind if we should lock her up or let her go after we've got the information from her. We can hand her over to the ICC. She was working with Apocalypse, that's a crime against humanity right there. Then it will be both her and Malice in the same prison. The 2 other influential women in his life behind bars. Who other woman is influential in his life other than you? Shuri. Ororo grinned. Shuri. Haven't you noticed, the 2 of them talk to each other now? Before they acted like complete strangers. No, I didn't notice. I saw it when Ramonda visited the Bayern brothers in their cells. Ororo saw in her mind's eye the image of Ramonda dressed in burgundy royal robes and armed with a double-edged ceremonial sword as she entered the cells and gazed over the bounded and petrified Bayerns who had bruised her in the kidnapping. The same manner they hadn't pitied the man whose eyes she had gouged out during the kidnapping was the same way she didn't pity them, and they had sensed it. Well, that's good to know, said T'Challa. But speaking of mother, I can't wait until she looks into the terrified eyes of the mastermind behind her kidnapping. All in due time, we need to be patient. He'll eventually slip up. T'Challa glanced at the time. The moment he looked up from the kimoyo and stared at the closed office door, a noise like sparking live wires came from behind it. Soberk had arrived. Chapter: The enigmatic host opened the office doors. He wore traditional African attire. "Good day. I'm sorry to be late, I was in Angola." "Not a problem," said Ororo. After the requisite handshakes, T'Challa and Ororo entered the opulent office. "Please excuse the grandeur, this was my brother's house. I'm staying here until the great house is rebuilt," said Soberk as he sat behind the technologically savvy office desk. "I'm still getting used to the echo." T'Challa agreed since the office took up 6 rooms. "Kindly have a seat," said Soberk with an extended hand. Ororo was right, he does seem superficial, thought T'Challa. "Okay. The reason I asked for your help is simple. I need advice on certain matters that only you two are knowledgeable on, such as the duality of managing a country effectively and being a superhero at the same time." "Well, we are willing to share," said T'Challa. "Thank you. That was the kind of response I was hoping for." "But what are your plans for Aranzi?" inquired Ororo. "Basically, I'm going to follow in your footsteps and use my country's resources to aid the rest of the world. I specifically want to start a microfinance scheme for the continent. My father had collected a lot of revenue from the oil firms, mineral extractors and plutonium mining companies that operate in the country, which he kept for himself. I intend to use those funds to launch the project." "That's admirable," commented Ororo. "Thanks. Also, I'm aware of the political inconveniences that were placed on your country with the international isolation policy and whatnot, so I'm willing to assist in the areas that you are held up in." "We'll work something out," said T'Challa. "But what are you going to do internally?" "Basic infrastructure repairs and building. Proper redistribution of wealth, that sort of thing." "Do you have ministers or appointees to carry out the projects?" asked Ororo. "Not as yet. When I start the screening process, I may need your advice on what I should be looking for in personnel, seeing that I'll be away from the country most of the time," replied Soberk. "Also, with my father gone, the country's true financial worth will be now known. I estimate we will be one of the richest countries in the world and second only to yours on the continent. With that kind of money floating around, I want to hire the right people to handle the country's affairs. If you don't mind me asking, but how did you become so powerful so quickly?" asked Ororo. Soberk calmly looked at her. "I was born with the magic and now it has fully manifested itself." His gold watch alarmed. He checked it. "I'm sorry. I will have to conclude this meeting. I have another appointment." "Perfectly all right," said T'Challa. "I can let the maid bring refreshments before you leave." "It's fine," said Ororo. All 3 of them rose from their seats. "Did you land your plane on the helipad by the north side or the west side?" inquired Soberk. "The north side," replied T'Challa. "Then I'll drop you there. It's the least I can do." Soberk used his teleportation magic before the couple responded. They disappeared in a ball of mystic fire and then reappeared on the helipad in front of the Panther jet. He shook his guests' hands briskly. "I'll call as soon as I start the process." Then the miracle man disappeared, engulfed in mystic flames. The couple was speechless at first but gradually spoke while they entered the jet. "I thought it was nice, he wanting advice on how to balance his new life," said Ororo. "And odd too." Ororo set the course to Wakanda as the couple relaxed in their seats. "Having another super-rich country will benefit the continent, so I see no reason in not helping him start off," said T'Challa. He was correct about the restrictions. "We could probably pass the plans we had for world projects over to him." "Still," said T'Challa, "he does come across as being superficial." "You don't trust him?" "I just want to be cautious and not make the same mistake as we did with Midas," said T'Challa as he remembered the incarcerated king. Changing the subject. I don't understand why Fury doesn't just tell Thor about the missing weapon since it is from the Asgard dimension. He must have his reasons, suggested T'Challa. But out of speculation, if the Asgard pantheon wanted a thunder goddess for like a day, would you do it? Ororo planted her elbow on the armrest and she propped up her chin with a clenched fist. I almost did it once, so I may try it again. She smiled mischievously. Her eyes slid down to the control panel and she concentrated on the estimated time to Wakanda. There was plenty. At that point, she noticed T'Challa also stared at the time. Subsequently, T'Challa and Ororo looked up at each other. A moment later, they were stripping the clothes off each other and kissing vigorously. With nothing severely pending, they could make long guiltless love. T'Challa carried his lover into the section that contained the bed. There he caressed her firm peaks lovingly. His experienced hands worked across her body and they caused his wife to lose her self-control. They became one. She held on tightly to him. His rhythmic physical power was driving her to another sweet and thrilling finish. Chapter Ororo had dressed and headed for the flight controls as the jet landed in Wakanda. Alas, T'Challa thought about Aranzi as a new dominant power in the world. He began pondering on the issue. He'll have to watch for predators like I did. International politics is tricky to say the least. I can show him how. Also, he will need to keep an eye on his home front. Something that I let slip on my end when I first started out. Most likely I could use the wisdom I gained from those errors to advise him. On the other side of the jet, Ororo also thought about Wakanda's role in Aranza's future. Soberk's request proved that he was not too proud to say that he didn't know it all, she reflected and continued. That is a rare thing. We can also give insight in prioritizing his time accordingly between his country and helping others. It's a delicate balance. Then when you have a personal life like T'Challa and I, it can become a quandary if not handled properly. I'll admit that T'Challa and I have worked out an understanding that suits us perfectly. The arrangement with my X-Men teammates is also working. T'Challa and I may be the right people for Soberk to talk with. There aren't many super-powered world leaders on humanity's side out there. It is fortunate that Soberk seems to be on the right side. Later at their home, the couple met an excited Umba. It was a welcome change from the angry teenager that had lived in the house for the past 3 weeks. The incident reinforced Ororo's earlier examination that she managed her time, a country, and a family. Umba explained the reason for his mood to his guardians. They were equally surprised by the news. The specialist will check it out in the morning, said T'Challa. Consequently, the three went out to an eatery in Central City for dinner. It was Ororo's idea in order to keep Umba's spirits up. It made T'Challa reflect upon Ororo's and his understanding of children. Both of them had taught at 2 different kinds of schools. Ororo had prepared mutant kids for life in a harsh world at the Xavier Institute, and he had educated Harlem public school children. As a foreign teacher stint, it was a means of understanding and helping the outside world. So we are using both experiences to raise Umba, he said inwardly. And sad to say that if malice hadn't blinded the boy, we may have never met him, thought T'Challa. Chapter There were 2 sides of Aranzi. One side was the modern urbanist centers with Western tastes. The other side was the mystic sensibilities rooted in the countryside. It was the mystic aspect that Soberk's father had feared, hence he destroyed it along with Soberk's mother. Soberk walked to his mother's grave, the high priestess. The sun had since sunk in the distance, it had sent orange streaks across the sky in a last hooray. Darkness pervaded the graveyard. An army of crickets made their noises throughout the thousand of unkempt grave sites. He arrived over his mother's resting place. "Mother, I have returned," Then he dropped a flower on the grave. I miss you. I will make sure that Aranza never forgets you. A national day shall be given in your honor. And tonight your legacy shall carry on through me. He turned and faced the enormous graveyard. The graveyard for Aranza's mystics murdered by his father's orders on suspicion of treachery. However, his father was unaware that the mystics were buried each with an icon and object that held their powers. But Soberk knew. He lifted his hands skyward and he concentrated. His grey eyes glowed. Give me your power, he shouted. The earth moved as the graves were disturbed. Then energy burst out the tombs in the form of wiggling lines of translucent blue light. Yet Soberk only saw them. In a rush, the energies bombarded him. The ordeal lasted for 10 minutes. Soberk felt remarkably different when it was over. His senses were so heightened that he experienced the world on several planes of existence. Now he could break free from Callus's control. The fool thought he was using me when it was the other way around, said Soberk. He had required the power boost from Callus in order for the amalgamation to work. Suddenly he heard a woman's voice in his head and she gave a location. It was the telepathic woman that Callus contacted him with. Speak of the devil, said Soberk, and he teleported to the location. He reappeared in a vortex of fire. Then the flames disappeared. He was in a white-walled catacomb that acted as an office. I told you not to meet with them, said the 60-year-old Callus who passed for 50. The body showed the remnants of man who was physically fit in his younger days. He stood near a table, arms folded. The disguised spy master was dressed like a corporate branch manager, but without a tie. His British accent was faked yet so well practiced that it was difficult to tell. A stoic Soberk crossed his arm and pushed out his chest. He was waiting for the right moment. You are stubborn, but we'll work on that, said Callus as he picked up a stopwatch from off the table. Nearby on the table was the Asgardian artifact that had boosted Soberk's powers. The stopwatch reached 0 and then Callus looked at Soberk expecting the man to collapse in pain and in desperate need of another power boost. But the moment never came. Soberk sensed that the time was right. I no longer require the artifact's power, I have my own. Callus's expression gave nothing away. He was calm and he rested the stopwatch on the table. I want to renegotiate our agreement, said Soberk. He knew the momentum was in his favor, so he carried on without a response from Callus. I will continue to draw countries away from Wakanda as you intended. He stared eye to eye with the spy master. Callus's eyes gave away no surprise that Soberk knew about the master plan. But you will not have influence over my country, said Soberk. Well, you are ungrateful. After I put you in power. He pulled a hologram projector from the next end of the table and he turned it on. This is your new assignment. A facial image of Midas appeared from the projector. He was 29 years old. The eyes were deep in the head and green. This is, I know him already. That's the man who killed those millions of people in his land-grabbing scheme, said Soberk. What's my part? In 8 hours he is going to break out of prison. He'll be on the run for 2 hours. Then you'll go to the prison, perform a location spell on him, catch and return him. Sounds simple. You'll be returning him dead along with the people who helped his escape, countered Callus. What of the wife? She was just the enforcer. She doesn't hold the public interest as he does. And you're orchestrating the escape? Asked Soberk, but he knew the answer beforehand. The depravity of the man, he thought. Callus's body language affirmed the suspicion. What's the point of this? We can't let the world only view you as a healer. You have to be perceived as a man of action, so when we implement the hotline, more countries will turn to you instead of Wakanda when they face a problem that requires force. Soberk agreed wholeheartedly that his image needed to be tweaked. I'll do it. Call me when it's time. He summoned the teleportation flames and they swirled around him. And also, tell the telepath that she has a pleasant voice. Then he vanished. Chapter Callus's hand dived into the trouser pocket and he pulled up a pack of cigarettes. He inserted one into his mouth and lit it. He exhaled the smoke and massaged his right temple. The operation had gone sideways. Somehow Soberk had emancipated himself from his control. He peered at the Asgardian artifact that he had stolen from Fury. All that effort wasted, he muttered. Maybe it can be used in another capacity. He knew Soberk was rebellious. It was the reason the young man had fallen out with his father and why he met with T'Challa and Ororo. At least he is still a glory hound, said Callus. He opened the dossier on Soberk to find out where he could have received the new power. Then he closed the document because it was futile. He knew the information back and front. Dr. Alex Soberk's second son never married, multiple girlfriends, exiled from Aranza, became a medical doctor, etc. Other than the new scenario, Callus hated the Midas OP idea. The strategists in their wisdom thought that Soberk should take on a criminal that the entire world hated. Callus saw it differently. T'Challa and Ororo had captured Midas, thus when he escaped they would also be on the trail. He found it was too early for Soberk to be openly competing with the couple. But the strategists had objected. They thought it was brilliant that Soberk would upstage the Black Panther and storm in the public eye. Callus took another taste of the cigarette. He had to find a means of bringing Soberk back under his control before anyone found out. He loosened his collar. The reason he dressed like a branch manager was to cover the bulletproof jacket that he wore, as well as the Persian gold breastplate that protected him from magic. Also, he had placed a chemical on his skin that masked his scent, therefore T'Challa would not sense that Soberk was in his presence. Chapter King Midas was imprisoned at the International Criminal Court's detention center in The Hague, Netherlands. The extraction team that went for him consisted of 5 men and 1 woman. None of them knew their employer. They were provided with equipment and logistics for the prison break. The woman disguised herself as a new lawyer from the law firm that represented Midas and his wife Malice. But she wished to speak with Midas. She was properly checked by security before entering the briefing room, which was on the 7th floor of the main section. Midas was waiting patiently in his green prison clothes. He was curious about the visit. The professionally dressed woman, in a soft green suit, strode into the room and she rested her briefcase on the desk. "What's this about?" asked Midas. He was pleased with himself because he still thought about Malice despite an attractive 6'1" woman standing in front him. Her hair was fashionably cut short. "I'm here to get you out," said the woman with an Argentine accent. Midas grinned because he was serving multiple life sentences. The woman slipped a pen from her purse and she squirted a substance from it onto the briefcase. Then the woman roughly pushed Midas onto the floor. The operative lifted the briefcase. She dropped the desk onto the side to shield him from the intended explosion. Meanwhile, the substance had a chemical reaction with the briefcase. It fizzed. She expertly flung the briefcase at the door. Instantly she ducked behind the desk with Midas. Kaboom! Midas felt the heat even though he was protected from the full blast. The woman took control of his arm and she led him out the room. He understood it was a breakout. But who ordered it? Midas thought. He was aware that some individuals would go through any lengths to execute him personally. Still, he had no fear, thus he went along with the woman. However, he remembered Malice. "We have to get my wife," he shouted. "I'm not leaving without her." "Someone else is getting her," lied the woman. She had followed the instructions. She confiscated the sidearm from one of the fallen guards outside of the door. "Follow me and you'll meet her on the outside." Midas didn't want to believe her. Suddenly, kaboom! Kaboom! The building shook. She placed sunglasses over eyes and then activated a beacon in her purse. The explosions continued. "Why aren't we getting out of this area?" asked Midas, since seconds had passed and they were still outside the briefing room. "The transport is coming to us," replied the woman. "Shut your eyes until I tell you otherwise." Midas obeyed and he wondered who her employers were. Meanwhile the power went. Then a laser beam dissected the building. Moments later the front of the prison detached from the main section and it collapsed completely on itself, leaving the cross-section bare. The woman and Midas were exposed to the night air. An armor-plated aircraft hovered into place in front of the woman and Midas. The 4-feet-long laser cannon was extended from the underside. A door was lowered. "Open your eyes," said the woman. He followed the instructions. Subsequently he and the woman boarded the aircraft. He looked frantically about for Malice until he was subdued and injected with a sleeping agent. Chapter T'Challa and Ororo arrived 2 hours after the prison break. They were equally surprised at the level of sophistication in the escape. Rescue crews were still digging out prisoners and personnel from the rubble. The media were kept at a distance from the prison. But word had already reached out that Midas had escaped. The couple located the warden and the ICC chairman in a tape-off area on the prison grounds. "Good to see you too," said the ICC chairman cordially. "We understand that Malice is still in custody." "Can we speak with her?" asked T'Challa. The white-haired chairman turned to the bewildered warden. "Sure," said the man. "Anything to capture the bastard." 5 minutes later, the couple was heading up the steps towards Malice's cell. They discussed the issue of Midas' abandonment of his wife. "It seems out of character," said T'Challa. "Still, we're assuming he's behind it. Remember, he made a lot of powerful enemies from his scheme," said Ororo. "Then there is the family back in the kingdom. He might still have control over some of them." Eventually they arrived at Malice's cell door. 10 guards were posted outside. "Does she know?" asked Ororo to the senior guard. "No," responded the guard. Then he opened the cell for the couple. Malice had been a difficult prisoner. She spat, bit and clawed at the guards. Then she became a danger to herself after what was deemed an attempted suicide. Therefore T'Challa and Ororo found her muzzled and restrained so tightly that she was immobile. She still had the exotic good looks and long curly black hair. A daily shot of nanites nullified her mutant ability to manipulate the molecules of organisms. She stared at T'Challa and Ororo with disgust. For the majority of her life she was practically a prisoner, and when she finally found freedom and happiness, T'Challa and Ororo had taken it away from her. Technically, Malice also blamed herself for the downfall because she believed it was better that she had killed Umba the moment she saw him. T'Challa removed the muzzle. "Midas escaped and he left you behind," said Ororo in a controlled manner. "Lies," said Malice. "Do you know where he could have gone to?" asked T'Challa. Her hateful eyes shot at him. Instinctively he reattached the muzzle as he had sensed Malice's nasty intention. Chapter Soberk appeared on the prison grounds shortly after T'Challa and Ororo had gone up to Malice's cell. He noted the presence of the world media. Afterwards he negotiated with the ICC chairman and warden using his hero stature to great effect. Eventually he was allowed into Midas's cell. He used a worn shirt in the location spell. Then he vanished in a wave of mystic fire. 4 minutes later, a great ball of fire appeared in the area where the international media had set up their equipment. People scrambled for safety from the mystic fires. The fires dissipated and lying in the spot was the aircraft. The crew was dead and Soberk was outside effortlessly holding Midas's lifeless body up by the throat with one hand. "I got him," he said triumphantly. Immediately Soberk was lit up by 100 camera flashes. Meanwhile the muzzle stifled Malice's scream. She had sensed her husband's demise. The heartache forced tears out her eyes. Chapter T'Challa and Ororo had no remorse for Malice. A guard brought the news that Soberk captured Midas. "He's here," said T'Challa since he found it strange. "He must have seen it on the news," said Ororo. "Possibly." They left the cell and went to the ICC chairman and the warden. Soon the group viewed on a monitor the media frenzy that converged on Soberk. "Why did he take them out there?" asked the warden. "For the show," speculated the ICC chairman. T'Challa and Ororo remained quiet for the moment. They didn't want to discuss Soberk's actions as yet. Eventually Soberk teleported the bodies and the airship onto the prison ground. Then he showed by the warden and his group. "Why did you do that?" snapped the ICC chairman. "I believe the world had a right to know quickly that one of its reviled men was done away with and that they were safe from more hardship he may have caused," replied Soberk. He turned to T'Challa. "Don't you agree?" "No," said T'Challa flatly. "Then we have a difference of opinion," said Soberk. "Where they you find Midas?" asked Ororo. "On a beach." "I don't know which country," replied Soberk. "Take us to it," said Ororo. It was a command and not a request. Soberk was unprepared for it, so a few seconds passed before he acted. "Very well," he said. Chapter Night was still present over the beach when the three heroes appeared. The sea was calm. Cold winds were blowing inland. "They were over there," pointed Soberk. T'Challa caught Midas's and 6 others' scents. There were markings in the sand from the aircraft. "You can return. We'll find our way back," said T'Challa sharply. "Is there a problem here?" asked Soberk. "We want to check out a few things," replied Ororo. "I'll be at the prison if you need me," said Soberk. Then he disappeared. A bad guy got killed, yet the scenario does not feel authentic, thought T'Challa. He knew Ororo felt the same the way, hence the reason they were out there. They had to investigate the scene for themselves. As usual, Ororo surveyed the vicinity in terms of electromagnetic activity. "T'Challa, there is a camera disguised as a rock over on that side." She pointed inland at the jagged 3-foot object. They arrived at the hidden camera. She removed the camouflage. The small satellite camera was aimed towards the beach. It was self-powered and still transmitting. "Someone was watching," said T'Challa. "We can track the person." He took the kimoyo from off his belt. He activated the wireless function and transmitted to the Wakanda Secret Service. In 3 minutes, the Secret Service had via the kimoyo traced the location of the camera's receiver. T'Challa gave the coordinates to the Sword's time-space computers. Thereafter the couple teleported from the beach into a supposedly abandoned warehouse. Instead, the length and breadth of the warehouse ground floor was an office. A rack of multiple monitors was behind the couple. News footage of the Midas escape and capture were on the screens. A computerized map board of the world was nearby. On the ground were color-labeled computer cables and power plugs. There was the background noise of several operating fax machines. Then T'Challa smelled cigarette smoke, followed by the scent of the man that had kidnapped his mother. Nonchalantly, Callus strolled out a corridor of stacked archives towards a computer terminal. He was reading a document in his hand intently. Ororo recognized him from the description Ramonda had given. Suddenly he realized that he was not alone, and he turned slowly to the intruders. His mind on the gun rested on the table 3 feet from him. The hunters T'Challa and Ororo stared dead on at their prey. Callus stared back eye to eye. "You slipped," muttered T'Challa. Story: Soberk's Ascension PT2. Despite what others had thought, we the denizens of the Asgard dimension were never gods. We were livestock. Like cattle left to graze until fat and then slaughtered on the appointed day, pondered Loki. Ragnarok was the day of our demise. Violent and horrible, so that our released essence provided nourishment for our unseen captors. Then we were reborn, and so the cycle continued. In between the time of rebirth and destruction, we as ignorant prisoners had lived idyllic with golden apples, mead, and wild boar to hunt. In a society that resembled the Vikings on Earth. Thor had broken that cursed wheel before he exiled me to this wretched place. But you Soberk have given me the means of restarting my version of Ragnarok so that I may return to Heroes Hall and wipe the slate clean of my wrongdoings in this present incarnation of life. For that I thank you, said Loki with a hyena laughter. 2 curved 10-inch horns protruded his forehead. Apart from that, he was a humanoid in his prime. His face was long and taunt. His hands holding the sooty cauldron while staring into the still water that was showing Soberk. The trickster raised up, and he viewed his primeval citadel. Inhaling the musk scent from wild animal furs that were ubiquitous on the stone floors and walls. The stale mildew pages of old magical texts. It was a primitive dwelling as compared to the structures that were on modern Earth. Still, the silence and coldness of his abode comforted Loki. The greatest master of the darker side of magic was Loki, the trickster god. Ever conniving due to his alienation from the other gods and the wish to have things his way. His schemes often entangled mankind, thus he kept an eye on Earth. His newest plot involved Dr. Alex Soberk, because the man had saved the Earth from a seemingly unstoppable plague. More importantly, Soberk had done the deed with magic. How did this mortal achieve such a thing? Loki had asked himself insanely. He had never seen human magic used on such a wide scale. Then again, Soberk did not resemble an ordinary human. Rather, the slender mid-30s man had hard brown skin and grey glowing eyes. Bursting with interest, Loki observed through the waters of time and space Soberk's ascension, and he discovered something that amazed him. Soberk had increased his magical energy with the essence of the creature that caused the destruction of Asgard in every cycle. Surtur. Presently Loki focused on the water and muttered a command phrase. The liquid became black and it churned for a while as the image in time and space changed. Then the water became placid and the image it featured was that of Callus, who had in his possession the artifact that carried Surtur's essence. It was he who had boosted Soberk's magic. Callus looked 50 years old, and from the images he was in a den of spies. But he had a hallmark that pleased the trickster. "He's a schemer like myself," said Loki. He saw Callus's hiding place for the artifact. It was in a warehouse that Callus used as a base. "Curse you, Thor," said Loki in a rabid manner as he recollected that his brother had taken away his ability to interfere with the past. Hence he was unable to steal the artifact from Callus then and there. "Still, it is a small matter. I will just simply take it in the present time stream," said Loki. Thus he viewed the warehouse in the present time. There he saw that Callus was in a standoff against a man and a woman. And Loki was familiar with both of them. The woman was Ororo. Looking at her, Loki remembered her fragrance and beauty that charmed him even as he was seducing her with the power to replace Thor as Thunder God all those years ago. She had vivid white hair and haunting deep blue eyes. Almost 6 foot, yet her weather manipulation ability toppled giants. Standing next to her was T'Challa. The trickster god frowned. He had encountered the man in the Avengers, the superhero group he had indirectly formed through one his schemes. T'Challa wore the unmistakable Black Panther bodysuit armor. He was in his mid-30s, 6 foot tall, strong, and athletically built. Loki watched on in curiosity at the confrontation. However, he also waited for the opportunity to steal the artifact. "Chapter, you slipped," muttered T'Challa, then with blinding speed he was racing into Callus. "They have finally caught me," Callus thought as he motioned towards the gun on the nearby table. But T'Challa had arrived in front of him. The next thing the spy master knew was that the Black Panther had him by the throat. He dropped the document from his hand. A few seconds later, he lost consciousness caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. T'Challa then hoisted Callus onto his left shoulder. He adjusted the sword on his back to make room for the man. Meanwhile, Ororo observed the environment in terms of bioelectrical activity, and she had sensed another human in the warehouse. The person was approaching the nerve center, which had the blaring news monitors and snaking coaxial cables on the floor. However, the person was blind to their presence due to the partitions around the area that climbed to the ceiling. Ororo raised a clenched fist sharply and it conveyed the army signal for halt. T'Challa saw it, hence he stopped his motions. Then she lifted one finger, indicating the number of combatants. Afterwards she nodded to the ceiling. He understood and nodded back. Thus Ororo summoned an upward wind current based on the atmospheric conditions within the warehouse. The wind lifted T'Challa and herself silently and swiftly towards the ceiling. They traveled the 60 feet distance with ease. Eventually they held onto nearest roofing frame. Then Ororo ceased the upward wind. T'Challa's strength and dexterity came into play as he held on with one hand while the other secured Callus. Ororo held on with both hands as she stared down. Her body poised and the hair came down the sides of her face. Her eyes glowed softly. In that brief instant, she truly felt like a god staring down at the insignificant humans. "Loki," Ororo said to herself as the memory of the authority he had tempted her with returned. Below, a thin 40-year-old woman dressed in black entered the area. She was slightly put off by the loose paper that spun in the air due to Ororo's wind manipulation. Still, the woman was a professional and she knew the signs of trouble, hence she drew her sidearm. "Now," thought Ororo, who was transfixed on the target code name Glimmer for her teleportation powers. Again, Ororo found it strange that her feelings towards being considered a god were rekindling. "I overcame this long ago after I had crossed the line that one time," she said inwardly. Ororo shook her head and resumed her focus on Glimmer. Then the Wind Rider aimed her right hand at the woman, and she threw down a lightning bolt at the target. There seemed like no passage of time between the moment the silver phenomenon left her hand and its impact on Glimmer. The low-voltage lightning overwhelmed woman's nervous system and subsequently her brain. As a result, she collapsed onto the floor. Her breathing was steady, but she was unconscious. Ororo performed another scan of the building. "There's no else here," she said and turned to T'Challa. "You can let go." He released the frame, and she caught him with the manipulated wind. She also dropped onto the wind cushion. Then they descend gracefully like they were in a mid-air ballet. Ororo checked the woman's vitals and they were in keeping with a person knocked out cold. She will awaken maybe in the next hour or so, thought Ororo. T'Challa stood nearby, his eyes on the monitors that replayed Soberk's capture of Midas. Ororo saw him. He's analyzing it. Trying to make the connection between Soberk, Midas, and the man he's carrying, Ororo thought. She watched around the section that resembled a busy office. The noisy fax machines were monotonously sending and receiving multiple documents to whom and from where? The man would have to explain, Ororo thought. So this setup is a part of the organization Fury spoke of, commented Ororo. But how would they know where to monitor Midas, unless they were involved with his escape, stated T'Challa. But why would a spy group want Midas free? Apparently they weren't expecting Soberk to spoil their plans. He looked at her. Do you want to stay back and look over the place or me? The last time we left something like this unattended it blew up. Standing, Ororo remembered the incident. I'll stay and check around. I don't see any explosive devices in the walls though. The couple were close to each other and Ororo sensed the uncanny electricity between them. T'Challa slipped his mask off and then he kissed her. Ororo felt a surge through her body. The kiss ended yet she had the lingering taste of his lips. Once I have both of them secured I'll come back. But I'll send the Secret Service as soon as I return to Wakanda, he said. Then he lowered his body over the woman. In one swift movement, he held her up with his hand and slipped her onto his free shoulder. Now he carried both Callus and Glimmer. Ororo listened as he gave his sword the CO ordinates for Wakanda. Then he teleported from her sight. All the while Loki had watched the couple and when T'Challa departed he decided it was time to take the artifact at the warehouse. Chapter Ororo was pondering her refusal of Loki's offer. The web he tried to spin her in with his carefully chosen words. I had no problem becoming the Thunder Goddess if it was for a worthy purpose. But Loki had an evil intent. I couldn't live with it. And I wasn't about to let myself be used like that, Ororo thought. She recollected the feel of the Asgardian armor that she had worn and then there was the hammer. Loki had made it specifically for her to wield and it was a means of channeling her powers, manipulating other energies and opening dimensions. It had felt glorious. Wild even, remarked Ororo. In her imaginations she saw what could have been. An uncontrollable entity, hot white eyes and an uncaring scrawl. The epitome of all that she disliked. I wonder whatever became of the hammer. But there was another aspect of her encounter with Loki. It was similar to the one she had with Dracula the Vampire King. My darker side has been tempted on so many occasions, Ororo confessed to herself. Thank goodness I had the will to free myself from those demons. She picked up the document that had fallen from Callus. It was a dated report on controlling paranormal practitioners. Leaving the nerve center, she entered the neat rows of archives and read the tags on the manila folders. They all concerned superhuman and supernatural activities. They really took Ramonda to get information on Wakanda, said Ororo. Then she heard Soberk's voice from the monitors. Thus Ororo returned to the nerve center. All the while she thought about the man's actions with regard to Midas's capture. I have nothing against gloating after apprehending a criminal. But there was something odd about his reaction, pondered Ororo. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. He's still new to this level of combating criminals. Maybe he'll ask T'Challa and me for pointers like he did for running his country. Her attention went to the fax machines. Beeping incessantly. Won't they ever stop? She crossed the floor towards the section where the machines were located. There were 25 of the mindless devices. They were placed in tidy columns. Each had a tray that collected the received faxes. Ororo took out several sheets from a tray. Written on the paper was a language she was not familiar with and she knew and spoke several along with the dialects. Probably they have a translation program in here, she said. Watching the computer screens. Then another thought crossed her mind, that of Umba's mother. Should we still pursue her now that we have caught the engineer of the plan, she asked herself. She thought about her friend Kurt, the Nightcrawler from the X-Men, and the manner he handled the realization that his mother was a criminal. It's the same with Umba. Her heart filled with joy when she thought about the boy. Ororo continued in her mind. We ought to capture her just to find out what she was doing with Apocalypse, Ororo said inwardly. Eventually she meandered through the office until a door to the outside caught her eye. The electronic lock only opened from the inside. She activated it. The door dragged itself across to her left. There was brilliant sunshine outside along with other grim warehouses. No one else was around. T'Challa and I should send out a strong message to this organization so they know never to touch a Wakandan again, she said. Then she continued in her mind. The message needs to be public and direct and not just through Fury. Speaking of Fury, I wonder if he has found that stolen Asgardian artifact as yet. If I were he, I would get Thor on it right away. Unless Fury was hiding the artifact from Thor. Said Ororo, you can never tell. There aren't many instruments that are capable of stopping Thor if he ever became mad. Maybe the artifact was such an instrument. T'Challa isn't the only one with a contingency for everything, she said inwardly. I'll have to check to see what we have for Thor. PSST, someone called out to Ororo from behind her. The voice sounded vaguely familiar to her. She turned around and a bright white light engulfed her. She vanished along with the light. Only her lingering fragrance proved that she was once there. Chapter Loki closed the warehouse door, and he hastily headed for Callus's safe. He didn't mind seeing Ororo in person once more, but he still needed to rid himself of her. I'll miss her, he said with the hyena laugh. The lanky frame moving with gremlin mischief. He was not sure if T'Challa was heading back soon. Although he was certain that the Black Panther posed no threat to him, the trickster wanted to be discreet. His magical aura made him alien-like while maneuvering through the technologically advanced office. Eventually he found the safe and he ripped it open with the frost giant strength that he had inherited. And in it was the artifact. Small and oval with Surtur's engraved image, a two-horned fiery beast with the twilight sword. Perfect. He brought his right hand down on the artifact, but a magical force field impeded him. Ha! Scowled Loki. There's no human magic that can deny me. He regurgitated a few command words, yet they were unable to remove the spell protection. Hog's breath, shouted Loki dementedly. His eyes became burning red. Callus did this, he thought. So he will undo it. With that thought, the trickster teleported the artifact and himself to his citadel. From there he would find Callus and deal with him. Meanwhile, in Wakanda, T'Challa was overseeing the processing of the unconscious prisoners and speaking with the head of the Secret Service. During the pauses he took time to ponder Soberk's behavior. I think he feels it's a game, T'Challa thought. When it isn't. I should have mentioned to him in the meeting the risks of involving himself fighting criminals. For one, he is putting his country in danger of reprisals from enemies. T'Challa stopped. Still, I shouldn't scare him away from what he wants to do. One of the androids that changed Callus out his corporate clothes and into red prisoner attire discovered the Persian breastplate that protected the man from magic. What this used for? T'Challa wondered. The antiquity reminded him of the troublesome Abner Little of the secret group called the Collectors. This is something he would quite literally kill for, thought T'Challa, and he frowned. Then he sent the antique to the archives section. Afterwards he continued his introspection. We'll have to tell the nation that the bastard has been caught. Or maybe display him. Years ago he would have been decapitated as soon as he awakened. Now he can be placed on trial. Nonetheless, the citizens can feel safe again whenever they travel abroad. Then there's Nakia Exon. Should we downgrade our search for her? Maybe for Umba's sake we should carry on with it. At least when we find her, the truth between her and Shadani might be revealed. T'Challa out his kimoyo, and he made 2 quick calls, one to his mother Ramonda and the other to his sister Shuri. The two women stated that they were on their way to the prison. Ramonda was over 60. She had fierce brown eyes and an equally feisty spirit. And the citizenry loved their queen mother and she loved them back. For a brief moment, T'Challa remembered his mother's face when he had left as a teenager on his sojourn into wider Africa. In a way he knew that her heart was broken to see him leave unprotected and with no means of communication with Wakanda. Yet she had encouraged him to go on the journey. Shuri was there also, by her mother's side. She didn't seem aware of the significance of his departure mainly because she was so young at the time. Now she is an accomplished young woman, thought T'Challa. Ororo and I can even trust the nation's security to her in our absences. He returned his focus to Callus. He had a white face and forehead. A clump of thick graying hair was on his head. Then T'Challa's mind strayed to Ororo's reaction on the warehouse ceiling. She seemed troubled like she was fighting something internally, he said inwardly. When we get some quiet time I'll ask about it. He inquired on the progress made with Glimmer, and he was informed that she being placed in a cell. We'll have to start an investigation into the reason this organization freed Midas, he said to the chief officer. So we'll start interrogations immediately when they awaken. Thereafter he stared through the window as Callus was strapped into a metal chair by the androids. The lights were flickering in the room. Still the androids kept at their duties despite the seeming malfunction in the lighting system. On the other T'Challa sensed that something was amiss. But before a word erupted from his throat, Loki appeared in the room. T'Challa recognized the goblin who had his back arched and a smirk on his face. He muttered a few inhuman words and the androids were laid to rest in violent explosions. He turned to T'Challa and more strange words tumbled from his mouth. T'Challa was quicker. He pushed down the officers nearest to him on the floor as the window broke into pieces. Satisfied that the Black Panther was no longer there, Loki performed the most basics of his tricks, teleportation. And he and Callus disappeared from the room. T'Challa rose sharply and he leapt through the broken window into the room. What does Loki have to do with this? He asked. His mind working possible scenarios as he turned to the standing officers. Then his Kimoyo rang. It was Ororo. Love, he answered. Honey, I'm in the Atlas Mountains, Morocco. This might seem strange but I think Loki teleported me here from the warehouse. No, it isn't because he just snatched the kidnapper. What? Loki's involved with him. Seems like it. T'Challa minds was racing. Then he remembered the articles removed from Callus. I have an idea how to find them. We'll get Soberk to do a location spell. How does that sound? Great. But since we're going up against Loki we'll need the armors. And we don't have much time to spare, said Ororo. Okay. I'll come and get you. Then drop you off in the vault. I'll get Soberk afterwards. Got it. I met Ororo provided T'Challa with the location. He gave a few orders to the officers to see about the room and check on the next prisoner. Then he told the sword Ororo's location, which was Jebel Toubkal in South Morocco. He disappeared in a golden light. When he appeared at the site he was greeted by afternoon sunshine and strong winds. A lane of small white clouds ran from the mountain peak he stood on towards the horizon. The winds were like trestles that held up Ororo from the summit. Her arms were folded as she speculated on the reason Loki had spared her life. He must also have our meeting in mind, thought Ororo. Then she placed the Kimoyo on her belt. Another brush with death, commented T'Challa as he took off his mask. Yes, another one. Ororo lowered herself into his opened arms and kissed him deeply. They teleport that way. The sensation sent a thrill through their bodies. They emerged out of compressed time and space and found themselves in the vault. It was a hidden storeroom in the Manga mountain range that contained souvenirs and confiscated items from their battles. Their lips detached. "I love you," said T'Challa. "I love you back. Now go find Soberk." Eventually they parted from the warmth and comfort of each other's arms. And T'Challa left like a whisper. Soon after, Ororo inquired from the vault's artificial intelligence the location of the armors. 3RD Quadrant, responded the dull computer. Subsequently Ororo flew over the inhabitants of the vault. Things created in the pits of evil that were difficulty to destroy and too dangerous to be left in unsafe hands. But not all the items in the vault were for evil. Some, like the armor, required safekeeping. She landed in front a showcase. Resting inside were the two god-blessed armors, specially made for combat with supernatural entities. In the inert state, the armors were 4-inch gray bars with the Panther crest imprinted on the front. Ororo opened the case and she pressed her finger on the crest of the first bar. A nanocomputer read her genetic code. Suddenly the bar lit up. It made a noise as though gearing towards an action. Ororo kept her finger on the bar until it transformed into glittering dust that rolled over her body and eventually merged with her uniform. Ororo kept her breathing steady as a pre-configured armor formed out of the glittering grey dust. It clung onto her curves and bosom. Thin arms from the armor rested on her temples. They transmitted her instructions to the rest of the protection. Ororo checked that she was still able to reach the vibranium-bladed knife on her belt. Afterwards she took the next armor from the showcase. She went to the locker that contained the spare surveillance equipment. She wanted a miniature tracker and voice transmitter. The circular item was so small that it rested on her fingertip. "I'll put this on Soberk," thought Ororo. "We can't afford to lose him in a battle with Loki." Ororo returned to the area she had appeared. There she tried to make her own connections between Loki and the kidnapper based on what she had seen in the warehouse. "Well, the files showed that they dealt with the paranormal," said Ororo. "And Loki is deep into magic like Soberk." She rested on the staircase for the moment as her pondering continued. "Maybe T'Challa's right. We should be cautious with Soberk." Therefore Ororo decided it was best to place the transmitter on Soberk without his knowledge. Chapter After coming off a call from the White House, Soberk wrote into his BlackBerry meeting with U.S. President. "Tomorrow at 1:25 p.m. Then he resumed helping rescue workers search for bodies in the rubble of the International Criminal Court Detention Center, half of which had been destroyed in Midas's escape. And even though Soberk knew the carnage was orchestrated for his behalf, he shamelessly lifted out bodies from the piles of concrete like a hero. "You're going to make it," he told the victims encouragingly while he healed them with his powers. Yet in his heart he felt no compassion for them. It was all an act to win praises. Helping him was the fact that the Black Panther and Storm had left the prison grounds and had not returned. Therefore everyone had turned to him for assistance. Yet Soberk believed the glory he received was his due after a lifetime of punishment by the overpowering personality of his late father. He had been the son of a gruesome dictator that believed his mother was traitorous and thus executed her. And the father took out his anger over the mother on him. He often remembered the torment in the great house where he lived with his father and half-brothers. There he was reduced to the point where he had little self-worth. That was until he left as a young man. Thus he viewed his permanent disfigurement as a small price for something he never had. "Soberk," T'Challa called out from across the tide of yellow and black jacketed rescue workers. Chapter T'Challa was quick to the point. Soberk readily agreed. "This Loki, he's major threat to the world?" he asked. "One of the biggest," replied T'Challa. "So how are you going to defeat him?" "With speed, cunning, and guile," It was T'Challa's confidence that drew out Soberk's ego. Thus he said, "Then I want to do more than show you his location. I'll go with you and fight him." T'Challa did not want to block Soberk, despite the danger. In all regards he was a novice. He may have succeeded against a Midas who was without his power suit, but Loki was a different kind of challenge, thought T'Challa. Nevertheless he said, "I knew you were going to say that." Thereafter the two traveled in nanoseconds from the Netherlands to Wakanda. They materialized at the entrance to the vault. Ororo had sealed off the rest of the storeroom with a metal door. "He's coming along," said T'Challa. Concurrently Ororo stepped close to T'Challa and Soberk as she exchanged the armor for a personal item of Callus. She gently bounced into Soberk for a wisp of a second, and thereby planted the transmitter on him. He was totally unaware of the contact. Meanwhile Ororo kept the receiver in her right ear. "Were you informed of the likelihood that we may not return?" asked Ororo. "Actually no," replied Soberk. Ororo stared him directly in the eyes. "We don't know what Loki has planned. We may even have to sacrifice ourselves to stop him." "I'm not afraid," said Soberk. Even though mentally he was questioning if it was a wise move to go with them. He wanted to be around to revel in the glory. Also Loki is a deceiver. "Don't trust anything he says," Ororo said. Meanwhile T'Challa removed his right glove and he pressed on the crest. Grey glittering dust draped him as it had done Ororo. His new armor joined with the vibranium weave suit he wore. "What's this for?" inquired Soberk. "It protects us from some of his magic-like energy projections and transmutations," responded Ororo. "What about me? Where's my guard?" Soberk sounded troubled. "You have the ability to transmutate your form, we don't. If he turns you into anything then you can always change back," said T'Challa assuredly. "I've never done such a thing before," said a concerned Soberk. "Then you'll learn along the way." Ororo handed him Callus's watch. Soberk took the item. "By the way, while you're gone, who looks after Wakanda?" "We have contingencies for that," answered T'Challa. HMMP Soberk performed the location spell. His eyes became bright grey. A mystic fire covered his clothes but did not burn them. "I've found him, but he's veiled to me. I will not be able to place us at his exact location, but just a short distance away." "So be it," said T'Challa. Soberk concentrated. Suddenly the three were sucked into a vortex. They reformed inside of a subterranean labyrinth. The ceiling was a few feet from their heads. The tunnels seemed unused and devoid of life. A dead man's silence and stillness lay behind every turn. "Stay sharp, Soberk," said T'Challa while he withdrew the sword from his back. The techno skin that coated the dark force energy blade slid into the hilt. "Is this Asgard?" he wondered. Meanwhile visible lines of electricity formed out the corners of Ororo's eyes. She clenched her fists. Then she scanned the vicinity. "I have no scent," said T'Challa. "And I don't see anything mildly biological," said Ororo. On the other hand, Soberk was aware of Loki's presence. He was magnetized to it. "I can sense him," he said and pointed towards the stone wall on his right. "Through there." T'Challa slipped his kimono from his belt and it showed Callus's face on the screen. "This is the person he took." Soberk looked at it. At first he didn't recognize Callus because the spy master had worn a disguise in his presence, but the more he viewed the picture it became apparent T'Challa's quarry and the mastermind of his ascension were the same person. "I see," he said. Ororo pointed her opened palms at the wall. "Stand back," she said. Then she emitted searing lightning bolts from her hands. The lightning began drilling into the hard rock. Chapter elsewhere. Loki was bemused that Callus had no fear of him. And he understood the reason. "We are the same," said Loki as he stared at the human imprisoned in the metal chair. "I can torture the information out of you in so many ways. But then you have done the same to others. So I'm not going to waste time finding your breaking point. But I'll make you an offer. Either shut up or free me," said Callus drearily. He had awakened disoriented. When he had seen Loki, he remembered the file the organization had on the trickster. "Release Surtur's essence and I will give you all of Wakanda's secrets, or better yet, destroy it," said Loki. He had realized the spell on the artifact was Asgardian and one he didn't know of. Then he gestured with his left hand, and the chair raised off the ground. It floated towards a small pool of dark water. Callus stared down. "Observe," said Loki and whispered a smatter of words. Thereupon the pool waved and then bright-colored images through time and space appeared on the surface. Finally the images settled on Wakanda. A montage showed people oblivious to the viewers of their private lives. Then Loki released a train of strange words from his lips and in his hand formed an imitation of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. The very same one he had presented to Ororo. "I believe you know what this is and what I can do with it," teased Loki. Callus was emotionless. He knew more about Asgard than most of Earth's population due to his father and an army rangers team that had explored the godlike dimension. "No deal." "Why?" asked Loki, holding back his rage. "I don't know what you're going to with that thing. I assure you that it has nothing to do with Earth or humans." "You expect me to believe that?" Abruptly Loki became aware of Soberk's presence. He lowered the chair at the edge of the pool. "I'll give you until I return to change your mind," he said. The hammer disappeared into nothingness. Then he teleported to the intruders. Callus smiled insanely. Since he had the perfect opportunity to learn Wakanda's secrets, yet he couldn't because Loki and all his kind were also considered the enemy. Chapter Ororo made steady progress through the stone. T'Challa and Soberk followed behind. Yet Soberk was beginning to think differently about T'Challa and Ororo. He saw in them genuine valor and belief as they continued into the unknown, so they could thwart a powerful adversary. "The world is better off with true heroes," he thought. "But I can never be that." Then Loki appeared at the right of the group and he captured them in separate force fields. Immediately T'Challa made a war cry as he slashed out his force field and he sprinted towards Ororo, barely evading a magical blast of energy from Loki that streamed behind him. T'Challa sliced the front of the magical force field that imprisoned Ororo and it split in two. Consequently Ororo fired her lightning at the dark god. Loki merely motioned the snaking attack away to his left by flicking the left fingers. Still Ororo had a few more tricks. She shot lightning bolts at the ceiling above Loki. As he was repelling the falling rocks, she released lightning into the ground in front of him. The sharp movement beneath his feet felled the trickster. And before he regained composure, T'Challa was pouncing at him with the sword aiming for the trickster's head. Like a reflex, Loki muttered a phrase that should have been the end of T'Challa. Instead the Amor protected him, and he was tossed away from Loki. Meanwhile Soberk tried in vain to free himself. His mystic fires blazed inside the force field concealing him. Loki spotted Soberk. "He's the one leading them to me," said Loki. Consequently both of them disappeared from the eyes of T'Challa and Ororo. Loki brought Soberk into a sealed-off tunnel. Then he removed the force field. Soberk stared intently at the trickster. "Put up a shield in case he attacks," Soberk thought. Meanwhile the mystic fires on his lower arms extended like 12-inch blades. "Have no fear of him," was the mantra that played in his mind. Therefore he willed his nerves to be calm. On the other side, Loki calculated Soberk's countermeasures and thereby he devised a series of attacks. But let's not be too hasty, thought Loki. Soberk, the trickster said. I know your secrets. Like the plan that you and Callus had hatched to bring down Wakanda. The staged escape of the prisoners so that you brought him in. But I particularly enjoyed, as one viper to another, was you pretending to befriend Storm and the Black Panther when you're their enemy. And those secrets will remain with me as long as you stall Storm and Black Panther from finding my lair. Soberk remained quiet. His focus was on Loki's expected attack. What do you say? Asked Loki. No, the trickster became enraged. He whispered a hex. Soberk's shield barely stopped it and was shattered. Still Soberk moved forward quickly. He swung the fire blades at Loki and made contact on the shoulders. Loki laughed like a hyena as the blades broke against his body. Then the trickster spewed another spell from lips and it started tearing out the magic from Soberk. Chapter Ororo's lightning and plasma energy clawed a path through the stone tunnels. Loki does not know a transmitter is on Soberk, she said to T'Challa. Still, do we trust the words of a known liar, he said while watching the tracker from Soberk's beacon on his Kimoyo. Then we'll have to trap Soberk into a confession, said Ororo soberly. We're almost there. At least we were correct not to fully trust Soberk, thought T'Challa. Ororo pushed her powers further. Mentally she was nearing her threshold where she was in control of herself. I'm a mutant and not a goddess, she reiterated to herself, remembering the phrase Xavier had used when he had found her as a teenager. Eventually the final wall succumbed to her will and it collapsed. Instantly she saw Loki draining the magic out of Soberk. The trickster threw aside Soberk. I have spared you twice, Storm. I shall not again, he said and evaporated out of sight. T'Challa dashed to Soberk and knelt on one knee beside him. He's alive but weakened, said T'Challa. There was no response from Ororo. Hence he looked up at her. Her eyes were closed and her arms extended as though in a trance. I know where to find Loki, she said, he's using the hammer. Chapter The trickster changed the image in the pool from Wakanda to Aranzi. Then Loki activated the hammer over the country that Soberk ruled. Great thunderstorms began taxing the land as punishment for Soberk's actions. Then the trickster raised Callus from the ground. Listen carefully, human. I'm going to make you relieve the pain of all that suffered from your hands. The Asgardian's voice was deep and vexed. Being in your company is a pain by itself, retorted Callus. Loki dropped Callus roughly. The chair he was strapped to made a clang noise. A rumbling came behind the wall on the far right. Moments later it was ruptured and Ororo flew through the opening. Loki barely glimpsed T'Challa to the back. Then the Black Panther was gone like a ghost in the forest. Subsequently Loki lurched backwards as he felt a sudden presence. It was T'Challa who had teleported for the surprise strike. Loki was fast as the Black Panther and he dodged the initial attack. Nevertheless T'Challa adjusted quickly and he trimmed off Loki's right hand from the arm. Importantly, it was the hand that held the hammer. With a phrase, Loki shot T'Challa away from him. Unbeknownst to the trickster, Ororo clutched the fallen hammer. She directed her powers through it, all the while dispelling the dark impulses it created in her. Then Ororo swung the hammer at Loki, who was focused on T'Challa. The trickster turned around from the Black Panther and into the full swing of the hammer. It smashed into the left side of his face, toppling him. Ororo bore down on the now disfigured deceiver with the hammer. In fear, he repelled her with his hands and the hammer faded into the air, flinging her a few meters from where he lay. Then he tried to stand. That's when he lost his head. Diving T'Challa decapitated the god with a timed slash. The head fell, bounced on the horns and came to rest within striking distance of Ororo. She pulled her knife from the belt and stabbed it into Loki's broken face. He yelled in agony. She lifted the head and tossed it into the pool, hoping that it drowned him. Instead he was sucked into time and space, disappearing in an upheaval of the waters. Chapter T'Challa promptly secured Callus in the chair. "What's your connection to Loki?" he asked, but as expected Callus remained muted. "T'Challa, look," said Ororo as she neared a pedestal that had the Surtur artifact resting on it. "It's the weapon stolen from Fury." She took up the small and oval vessel. T'Challa stared down at Callus. "We'll eventually find out what happened here," he said. Then T'Challa dragged the chair behind him as he walked along the stone floor. He was heading for Soberk, who was dragging himself out the wall opening. T'Challa was aware that Soberk was unable to heal himself. "We're going back to Wakanda. You'll get treatment there," said T'Challa dryly. Ororo flew over with the artifact. Subsequently the group left Loki's lair. 5 hours later, T'Challa and Ororo met with Nicholas Fury, the director of SHIELD, in a designated secret place. He was a man who benefited from slow aging, hence he resembled a person in his 40s. His hair was a mixture of grey and black. The body was that of a commando. And no one dared made a joke of his eye patch for an injury sustained in World War II. He was presented the artifact. T'Challa and Ororo explained how they recovered it. "But what does it do actually?" inquired Ororo. Usually Fury would have said none of your business, but since she helped him out a tight spot he obliged. "At full power, it can bring forth Surtur, the destroyer of Asgard, and he's one of less than a handful of entities who can defeat Thor." In those words he admitted the reason the weapon was kept secret. At lower levels, it can increase magic. And it disappeared the same time Soberk's powers increased, thought T'Challa. "But out of curiosity, was the woman you captured with the kidnapper thin?" Fury described the person from the surveillance footage. "Yes," replied Ororo. "We also found that she had teleportation DNA," said T'Challa. "Why do you ask?" "Because she stole the weapon," replied Fury. "Now we have a common enemy with regards to this organization," said Ororo. "We do," said Fury. Afterwards they departed from the meeting place. Chapter T'Challa and Ororo pored over the evidence that they had on Soberk, and it was thin, since most of it was based on Loki's words. "We'll have to let him go for now," said Ororo, sitting at the desk. "But going back to your earlier idea, we can ensnare him. Say we go along helping him set up his country, and then we." Ororo listened attentively to T'Challa's scheme and she liked it. A day after, Soberk returned to Aranzi, but he had lost his magical healing abilities. And he was concerned that Callus might eventually reveal the secrets to T'Challa and Ororo. "I'll have to reach him somehow before that happens," he thought. Story: checkmate. The jet roared out the administration building tunnel and into the afternoon sky. T'Challa recollected that Ororo had not slept well the night before. She had felt strange occurrences in the natural order of the world. As a precaution, she had gone to check on the elemental mine. The mine was unique in that energy referred to as magic was being harvested by Wakanda as an alternative energy source. The site for the mining was a vortex that had been long studied by Wakandan scientists. T'Challa landed the jet, and he stormed into the facility. The director was marshalling the care of the miners who had returned. "There have been multiple explosions in the last 2 minutes," said the director to T'Challa. "I'm going in," said the Black Panther. He pulled the computerized mask over his face. The rest of the ceremonial combat uniform was black and made from woven vibranium metal. The sword was magnetized to his back. The weapon's blade was sheathed by nano-robots. T'Challa ran up the ramp that led to the circular portal. He dived in and the sensation of being physically stretched took over his body. It hurt for a second and the physical reality twisted and turned in all manner of shapes. Hold on, he thought. Physical reality became stable, and T'Challa landed on the deck of one of the 10 mining platforms. And he saw them, a horde of giant creatures. They were falling through a tier in the elemental tunnel onto the last of the linked platforms. The remaining miners were scampering towards the portal. A few of the giants pursued them. Explosions upon explosions rattled the last platform. Ororo must be there, thought T'Challa. The tier widened and the red-brown horde poured out on the 8th and 9th platforms. Get to work, T'Challa thought. He ensured that the miners got to the portal while he confronted the giants. T'Challa sprinted towards the colossal beasts, and he withdrew his sword. The Dark Force energy blade emerged from a sheath of nano-robots. The giants were 20 feet tall, humanoid, and slender. T'Challa judged the distance to the giants' faces and he told the time-space computers on the sword's hilt. The Black Panther was teleported to the shoulder of the one of the giants. With a battle cry, T'Challa severed the giant's neck until it fell off. T'Challa teleported to another giant and committed the same act. As the threat of the Black Panther became clearer to the swarm, they concentrated more on him. A wall of bodies came crashing at T'Challa. Still he fought on. He slaughtered the masses that had landed on the 8th and 9th platforms. After what seemed an eternity, he managed to battle his way across the metal bridge to the 10th platform. His hyper-hearing picked up Ororo. She released blasts of plasma energy and localized tornadoes. But her mutant abilities were hindered by the lack of a proper atmosphere. Still Ororo battled on. The Black Panther and Storm eventually saw one another, but couldn't speak due to the ferocity of the fight. We have to close the tier, thought T'Challa, while he glanced at the hole that was feeding the creatures onto the platform. But what can we use? He looked at the resources that were immediate to him. There were Ororo's immense powers, the raw magical energy stored on the platform and the extractor machines. T'Challa shouted, "Ororo, I'm going down to the storage." The Black Panther returned the sword to his back, then he slipped down the side of a giant and ran to the edge of the platform and jumped off. Some of the mindless creatures followed. T'Challa activated the retractable claws on his gloves and he turned to face the platform. He sank the claws into the metal and it halted his descent. The creatures fell freely behind him into the abyss. Without delay, T'Challa moved to the section where the corridor to the storage area would be. He positioned himself at the spot and then he tore open the metal wall. He slipped inside and headed down the corridor. The storage held transparent cubes of the magical energy. T'Challa's focus went to the extractor machines. They used a substance called NL1 to absorb the magical energy from the elemental tunnel. Now if I can only reconfigure them, thought T'Challa. He began the operation by using the master computer. Then he called Ororo over the communicator. I'm going to separate the 10th platform from the others. Then you can lift it to the tier. I readjusted the extractors. They will seal the tier with the stored energy, said T'Challa. All right, said Storm breathlessly. T'Challa left the storage area via an elevator and went to the central controls. He activated the separation of the platform. He used the elevator again to reach the surface. The creatures still overran the grounds. Ororo was in the air attacking the horde with plasma energy blasts. The creatures spotted the Black Panther and they charged after him. T'Challa placed his Kimoyo on speaker mode. He withdrew the sword and defended himself. Honey, are you ready to lift the platform? Asked T'Challa. Yes. Where will you be? On the 9th, replied T'Challa. All right, said Ororo. T'Challa ran to the bridge while the platform dislodged. The Black Panther made it to the 9th platform and dealt with the creatures that were there. Ororo dived under the platform, and she concentrated on lifting it with the electromagnetic force fields that were on the underside. The exercise placed a strain on her body and she winced and willed herself to press on. The platform moved upwards and into the tier. The extractor machines extended out like tubes from the platform and they began to repair the tier. Ororo felt the platform lodge itself within the tier. She no longer had to carry it. So the Wind Rider left the platform and headed to T'Challa. Soon the tier healed, but the platform was crushed in the process. Storm landed next to T'Challa and they kissed. Then Ororo's white eyes turned blue as she relaxed. Let's get out of here, she said. T'Challa and Ororo returned to Wakanda. Are all the miners alive? Asked Ororo. Yes, answered the director. Ororo then told T'Challa about the strange occurrences. They are getting stronger by the minute, she said while they flew back in the jet to the capital. A private call from the Avengers headquarters came on the screen. Show it, T'Challa commanded the computer. Doctor Strange and Thor appeared on the monitor. T'Challa and Ororo. There is a major problem. Thor and I have been battling all manner of creatures and repairing the fabric of the dimensions over the last 48 hours. Since your country has developed a blend for science and the mystic, I was wondering if you had the same problems, asked Doctor Strange. We have, said Ororo. A few minutes ago, we fought a horde of creatures. Their origins are unknown. The most we got from an imp was that Balthazar was gone, so he was freed. That is quite interesting, said Doctor Strange. How so? Inquired T'Challa. Balthazar had been a constant on the magic plane for some time now. Commands, doorways, and other like things, were built around him. With him gone, everything just collapses, explained Doctor Strange. So we have to find him, said Thor, the king of an alien race called Asgardians. I tried getting onto Soberk, but he is indisposed for the moment, stated Doctor Strange. I was informed his country and yours are close. Could you ask if he has experienced similar disturbances? Will do, said Ororo. That message ended and another one was received. It was from the Secret Service. Uatu the Watcher is in Aranzi, said the division manager. We're on it, said T'Challa. He terminated the call after he received a few more details from the division manager. Ororo relaxed her aching body in the chair. I need to recharge, she thought. T'Challa noticed her. Looks like a massage is in order, he commented. I seriously need one, said Ororo. T'Challa contemplated telling her about Enzi's request, but he decided against it. Instead he said, I'm going to give you the full treatment. Ororo held his hand. I know you will, she said. But back to business. What could Soberk be doing that is so pivotal to the course of the Earth that it warrants the rare appearance of Uatu? Chapter 2 The country Aranzi, Africa. Soberk looked out of the corridors of power and he saw the alien observer called Uatu. The intangible being was as tall as the skyscrapers in the Aranza capital. The observer's white eyes stared at the chief administration building. Soberk returned the gaze with cool green eyes. The rest of Soberk's body was brown and hardened. He was dressed in the ceremonial robes of his deceased mother's kinsmen, since it was from them that he got the gifts. His mother and her clansmen were murdered by his father because the dictator believed the group was treasonous. Now, I move up another step, thought Soberk. He departed from the window, and he went to the studio, where the staff was preparing for the national broadcast. Several foreign media correspondents were in the audience. His Avenger communicator rang. He turned it off. Another ring occurred, and it was from the phone that the Black Panther and Storm had given him. Soberk smiled, because part of his address would deal with the Wakandan leaders. Soberk switched off the phone. While clearing his head, the ruler was advised by the producer that the address would begin in the next 3 minutes. Soberk sat down in the chair in front the cameras and the audience. He sensed the awe that his presence created in the normal humans. His works were legendary. The greatest one was when he had cured the Earth of a seemingly unstoppable global virus. He had consolidated his popularity by capturing a notorious criminal, establishing an African Union superhuman team, and becoming the president of the Union. It was a massive turnaround in fortune for an exiled doctor who was working in refugee camps. Now he had an opportunity to become even greater in stature. A few of the foreign journalists causally interacted with him before the address. The time came for the main event, so Soberk went and stood on the bare stage. The producer counted down the time to the moment the proceedings would go live. Soberk felt excited on the inside. He was going to leave the world in shock and awe. "We're live," said the producer. Soberk faced the main camera and he said, "Good day, my countrymen and women. The reasons for this national address are to first enlightening you on certain issues that will affect the general elections, and secondly to demonstrate the strength and resolve of our prosperous country. As we know, Election Day is just 2 days away, and my fellow political leaders are expecting you to exercise your democratic right to vote. We are blessed to have free and fair elections after so many years of my father's dictatorship. But for our elections to be free, the political parties and individuals must also be free. It has come to light that my main opponents are secretly being funded by a foreign nation. That foreign nation is Wakanda. I have left the reasons as to why such a thing is occurring to the Commissioner of Police along with the evidence." Soberk pointed to the stage floor. His magic made a door rise open. From underneath the floor rose 4 bounded and gagged prisoners. They were hybrids of predators such as hawks, reptiles, and big cats. Fear swept across the audience. Soberk continued, "Last night these abominations were found trying to do harm to our country. Their origins were tracked back to the country called Chejula and the factory that produced them. Today we shall retaliate against the crimes that these terrorists were planning and to deter all others. I merely have to say the name of the factory and Balthazar will destroy it for us." 5 shocked journalists were on their feet while the others were on the edge of their seats. The journalists murmured the strange name Balthazar. "Bedak," said Soberk. And in the Mediterranean Sea, the island nation Chejula experienced a mysterious disturbance. The waterfront factory called Bedak was scratched off the face of the earth by an invisible force. It occurred in the view of hundreds of people and it caused an instant panic. A cloud of dust and broken concrete swept over the neighboring buildings. Gas explosions sent flames through the thick cloud. "As for these abominations," said Soberk while looking at the prisoners, "they were created to destroy. They cannot be rehabilitated and are too dangerous to set free. Their fate will be soon known." Soberk lowered his hand and the prisoners were returned to the cell underneath the flooring. "I shall be giving further details in the coming days. Thank you and may God bless our nation," said Soberk. On leaving the stage, Soberk turned on the phones and they rang, but he ignored them while he switched to the silent option. "I have to visit someone first," he said. He gave a few instructions to his aides and then Soberk teleported in a ball of fire. Indianapolis, State of Indiana, United States of America. The tall gray building was registered to an accounting firm. In actuality it was the main headquarters for the Quarterman. Marshall Brandon was the head of the organization. He had been keenly watching Soberk's address and he didn't like one bit of it. A ball of fire appeared in front of his office desk. Brandon leaned back causally since he knew who it was. The fire disappeared and Soberk emerged. The two men eyed each other briefly like fighting dogs in a pit. As the head of an organization that dealt with the paranormal and international subterfuge, Brandon was not without his resources. He honestly believed that he could fend off Soberk if the need arose. "So you are the one trying to make me your puppet," stated Soberk. "Well, I have finally found you." "What do you want?" asked Brandon placidly. "I want you to stop badgering me. Because I know where you live, I know where your associates and their families live. In fact, I know about your entire operation," replied Soberk. "So from now on, you will not contact me. I will contact you." Brandon smiled. My, the good doctor has become a leader, an avenger, and a statesman. "But you would not had it not been for us," said Brandon. "And do you think that the world powers will allow you to keep Balthazar? Very soon, in fact maybe in the next 20 minutes, I will receive a phone call asking me to find a way to get rid of you." Soberk grinned. "You still need me to stand in the way of Wakanda?" Brandon shook his head. "No." Then he stamped his hand hard on the desk and the former admiral spoke. "You are a greater danger than Wakanda ever posed. You know what you did by freeing Balthazar? Chaos. You created chaos. As we speak, I have operatives trying to combat all manner of evils that were held back by Balthazar's presence. Hundreds of innocents have been killed because of your actions. You, sir, were a mistake. I don't care how many died. And no, it was you who made the mistake in thinking I would be your puppet. Now I have the power to be totally free from this organization," retorted Soberk. "If you raise a finger against me, then I'll have Balthazar pay you a visit," said Soberk. "Goodbye." Soberk disappeared in a blaze of fire. Brandon leaned back in the chair and gathered his thoughts. The phone rang. It was the call that he had expected to come. "I will start immediately," he said. Seconds later, the building wobbled and then disintegrated into dust like the one in Chejula. Chapter 3: The Beta Caves. Eastern Aranza. Soberk strolled in the cave network that was known only to his mother's clan. T'Challa and Aurora were calling him again. "Time to rid myself of them," he thought. Balthazar's psychic awareness had given Soberk the information about Wakanda's plans to rig the elections. Soberk took out the hologram phone, and images of Wakanda's leaders lighted up the caves as Soberk walked. "What do you want?" Soberk asked in a busy manner. "You have to return Balthazar," said T'Challa. "That is not an option," stated Soberk. "Your reckless actions have endangered the Earth," said Aurora. "Sacrifices have to be made for my goals to be achieved," explained Soberk. "So how far are you willing to go to reach those goals?" asked Aurora, while tempering her anger. "Look, my aims are a sovereign matter. You have your own country to run and so do I. We run our countries and our lives as we see fit," stated Soberk. "We know that you were involved in the staged prison escape so that you could capture the jailbreaker," shot T'Challa. Soberk knew it was the truth, but feigned ignorance to avoid entrapment. "I don't know what you are talking about," said Soberk. "I believe that there is nothing more I can learn from you two, so this concludes our arrangement. I'm grateful for the political stratagems that you taught me, but it is now time for the student to become a master." Soberk terminated the call and crushed the phone in his hand. The caves returned to darkness. Only Soberk's illuminated green eyes shined some light. He expected a call from the NATO nations regarding Balthazar and he would spring his biggest surprise yet. He would demand a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. "The pieces are all falling into place," thought Soberk. X-Men headquarters. The Wakandan jet landed on the X-Men grounds, and T'Challa and Ororo headed for the war room. They met Cyclops, Magneto, and Malice. "Care to explain what your friend did to Chejula?" inquired the silver-haired Magneto from Ororo. "He isn't our friend," stated Ororo, and she turned to Malice. "Did you create those hybrids?" Malice, queen of Chejula and manipulator of the molecules of living organisms, snared at Storm. "Yes, I did it for practice. But I didn't send them to Aranzi." "That is the truth. You were a convicted mass murderer who got out of prison through a loophole." "Your word doesn't hold much water," shot Ororo. "You just had to throw that in my face," jabbed Malice. "Before we go any further, who is this Balthazar and how did Soberk get a hold of it?" asked Cyclops. "Balthazar came to attention around the time of the first celestial meeting. He came out of Africa. We don't know how he was created. It was assumed that he was an anomaly," replied T'Challa. "And what do you intend to do?" asked Magneto. "We'll find Balthazar," Ororo said with finality. The Black Panther and Storm returned to their jet. T'Challa called Wakanda's hidden space station, and he ordered the activation of the mystic sensors. Ororo contacted the Wakanda Secret Service for the location of the final transmission made to Soberk. The jet soared into the sky and went into cruise mode. The space station reported several high-level entities moving through the world. While the Secret Service reported Soberk received the call in a mountainous region in Aranzi. "We'll leave Balthazar to Doctor Strange and Thor," said Ororo. She called Doctor Strange and told him the locations of the entities. "Thanks. I received so many complaints in the last hour from the mystic community of great creatures roaming through their territories," said Doctor Strange. "It is possible that Balthazar may have broken up into small units," suggested T'Challa. "I see where you are coming from," said Doctor Strange. "You and Thor can handle these units," said Ororo. "Agreed," said Thor. The call ended and then the couple concentrated on their impending confrontation with Soberk. The Black Panther and Storm teleported from the jet to the techno jungle in Wakanda. T'Challa and Ororo went to a laboratory that was only accessible to them. Inside the laboratory was a tube that contained a clone of Soberk. Chapter 4. Soberk was speaking with the resting Balthazar. "Your children are doing quite well," said Soberk. "Good," said Balthazar. Then the creature's head sank through the rocks of the Beta caves and he went underground. The rest of Balthazar was below the length and breadth of Aranzi. He would stay there resting until needed. It was always Balthazar's intention to return to Earth, but he didn't have the means until Soberk made the perilous journey through the many mystical planes to reach the dragon-like creature. Soberk used a spell that broke the gigantic Balthazar into smaller images of himself. Soberk heard a noise and saw a golden flash up the path. "T'Challa and Ororo," he thought. "I would hate for Balthazar to have to destroy them, but they leave me no choice." Soberk walked up to the vicinity of the flash. He stopped in his tracks when he saw the clone standing between the Black Panther and Storm. "What is this?" he asked, flabbergasted. "One thing we didn't show you was how ruthless we could be," said Ororo with her arms crossed. "This is your last chance to change your ways. The last person who tried to tell me what to do perished a few hours ago," said Soberk in anger. "We'll take that as a no," said T'Challa. He pointed to Soberk and said to the clone, "Subdue him." The clone muttered and Soberk's mouth began to seal with growing flesh. Soberk released a massive energy ray from his hands. The clone countered with a release of hot energy from its hands. The blasts connected and erupted. The cave trembled from the impact. Without the use of his mouth, Soberk was unable to utter any complicated spells, much less call upon Balthazar. The clone shot a spell at Soberk that paralyzed him and he was bounded in rings of energy. The rings caused Soberk to levitate. "Stop," commanded Ororo. The clone obeyed and stood still. T'Challa strolled to Soberk. "Coming up with a plan of action for you was very difficult for us," said the Black Panther, "because we didn't want to leave Aranza leaderless. The country had been through enough with your father already. Financing worthy opponents to take over in your absence was one factor of the plan. The other part was to remove you permanently from the world." Soberk glared at T'Challa in defiance because he thought the Black Panther meant to end his life. "We warned you, Soberk," said Ororo. T'Challa turned to the clone and then back to Soberk. "By the way, your replacement has learned a few Wakandan tricks. That was how he defeated you." Soberk struggled in his bounds to no avail. Ororo walked up to him. "You wanted to play games with us, so take this as the proverbial checkmate," said Ororo. "Now it is time to go." Soberk's eyes glowed furiously. T'Challa raised his sword. "Limbo Dimension," said T'Challa. The group was transported to another plane of existence. It was a barren, bleak, and arid place. A constant twilight covered the landscape. A spot was already prepared to house Soberk. "Time to sleep," said T'Challa flatly. The Black Panther nodded to the clone and it placed a spell on Soberk that sent the man into a deep sleep. Soberk was rested in a cavern and the doorway was sealed. Chapter 6 3 days later, Soberk was sworn into office after winning the general elections of Aranzi, and all of Balthazar's children were captured and contained by Doctor Strange, Thor and Dr. Voodoo, who had been battling with other released entities in the wake of Balthazar's disappearance. T'Challa and Ororo watched the news of the election victory from their home. "Do you have second thoughts about it?" asked Ororo. "No, me neither. It's just that we have to promise that this is the first and last time we will ever do this," said Ororo. "I promise," said T'Challa. Ororo pulled his face away from the video screen. He saw fear in her eyes. The fear of what they could truly become if they were not careful and watchful about their actions. "I'm serious, T'Challa," said Ororo. "So am I," said T'Challa assuredly, and he rubbed her arms gently. "This has taken a toll on me also." They kissed.